Hello and welcome back to our podcast. I'm here with myself, Joey, Onmi, and Bailey, and we are going to be discussing 1984 again. And this week we will try to focus on the topic of characterization and the different characters within the novel. So,
enjoy.
Here we go. Onmi, will you start us off, please? We're going to start with the main characters first, and then hopefully
transition into the
minor characters.
All right. Okay. So we have Winston, who is the main character. You see everything from his perspective, even in third person, and through that you kind of get the balance in between of being in the world of Big Brother, but also not fully believing in it and believing there could be something different, something maybe better. So that's part of that thing where through him we only see his perspective, so it's a very limited view, and it's kind of biased in the way the government should be or shouldn't be. And then we really get to meet the character Julia. She comes in later on, and she is the spectrum of being rebellious, but she doesn't really have a motive for it. Mm-hmm. She's just rebellious because she can be, because she just wants to be, but she won't be fully rebellious, as the point of saving her own skin. So she participates in all the Big Brother things, such as the anti-sex youth league, whatever that was called.
2 minutes hate.
The 2 minutes hate. She
hate week.
Screams at the TV more, to make sure people don't suspect her. But overall, she goes against everything that they're trying to do, such as the getting rid of the act of sex unless it's for procreation, getting having the idea of a family, doing the spying as a kid and all that. And so she's kind of one side of how Winston resembles as everything against Big Brother and all that. And now,
so when you're relating Julia to Winston, is there any kind of major details that make them so different personality-wise, and how they view society and why they're doing what they're doing?
More specifically, I think it'd be interesting. How are they different in the way that they're rebellious? And what it means to
Winston, as can be seen throughout the novel, is very, very shy about the way that he rebels, and in general is paranoid with every step that he takes and every corner that he turns. With even just simple, small things, like writing in the diary just outside the view of his telescreen, or just thinking about the rebels that were rebelling against the party before the party truly took over. Whereas with Julia has been, to what degree that you can be, almost completely rebellious against the party in a very open manner, to the point where she started rebelling when she was 16 with a 60-year-old man. Mm-hmm. And which is questionable morally in and of itself, but it's not the point.
I have a quote here that I think kind of sums up Julia as a character. In this scene, she's with Winston, and they are in their secret hiding place, and they're discussing the whole situation that they're in, and Winston is aware that it's completely wrong. They're both aware that it's completely wrong, but he tells her, you're only a rebel from the waist downwards. And it says that she thought this was brilliantly witty and flung her arms round him in delight. So she was happy to hear that. The thought of being a rebel from the waist down is a compliment in her eyes, because rebelling in the name of something bigger than that, or rebelling to benefit the society as a whole and maybe the future ahead of them, isn't something that she's concerned with at all. She's just rebelling.
I think that's I think that's a really good quote to just encapsulate Julia and how she goes about rebelling, and how she actually is important to the story in general, just because her rebellion is very, very obviously pertinent throughout the entirety of the story. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then we get the opposite of Julia, which is O'Brien, with his acting as if he's part of the Brotherhood?
Yeah.
Making sure.
That's interesting. Yeah, they are opposites because they're both faking it completely, but for different things.
They're opposite. Yeah, they're faking it, but so they're so similar because they're so encapsulated. So Julia is so focused towards rebelling the government, whereas O'Brien is totally focused towards, keeping Big Brother alive and keeping everybody in check and in line. So it's kind of, it's super cool to see that comparison and analysis between those two.
But
who else do we have?
As I was saying with O'Brien, it's like as Julia is rebelling but then hiding her face behind the hate week, O'Brien is following every whim that Big Brother gives to follow the rule while acting as if he's part of the Brotherhood or the society that is going against Big Brother, which the Big Brother and Brotherhood thing I just realized I could go on about, but we're focusing on characterization, so
alright, so we also have
actually, before we move on to these main characters, we should also talk about O'Brien a bit more. Because it's interesting to actually see one of the people that is part of the party that oversees and dominates the lives of this massive populace. For one, it seems that it's less that he is in on the entire gig that is happening over the people and aware of what is going on, and more that he is just someone who has become, I guess, in some words, the ultimate follower, to the point where when he throws a picture of the previous rebels in the flames, he immediately forgets about it, and this is what is referred to as a term of doublethink, that in the new speak of the book 1984. Which is interesting to think that the party does not hire people that are within its quote-unquote ranks. It just hires the people that are objectively the most obedient and the most brainwashed, that will allow them to attract the most rebels to weed out.
And I think that with Julia and O'Brien being foil characters of each other, I feel like Winston is that balance, which is, I think, the one of the best parts about these three being the main characters you see. As O'Brien is the part that follows Big Brother, wants to follow Big Brother through and through, and Winston still has that piece of him due to just his paranoia. And then there's Julia, who's rebelling as much as she can, but still saving her skin, which is also the other part of Winston, where he has these two conflicting ideals going on within. And so I think that's really cool that we have the three different levels, so to speak, of the people within the society in these main characters.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting because their relationship as well, because you see their relationship where all three of them are connected when O'Brien is trying to tell them, oh yeah, I'm part of you guys, I want to rebel and all that other stuff. and he's trying to convince them because he is so much a part of the Big Brother and that idea, and it's kind of really interesting when you see them all interact together. They just kind of they clash and then they don't because they're so opposites and they're all so different, you know? It's just, it's super interesting to see that.
I personally like the concept of O'Brien's character a little bit because we are introduced to him in the very beginning when Winston is at work and they have their 2 minutes hate or whatever, and during this Julia is shouting so loudly at the screen, she's so angry, and then but we see Winston make eye contact with O'Brien for a split second, and it describes it as a potential mutual understanding between the two, and Winston thought that O'Brien was on his side and that they had that in common. And this was before, the whole downward spiral of Winston rebelling more and more in the story. But it's interesting that O'Brien, at that point, was already manipulating Winston and making him think that he was on his side.
Which then, I guess, also leads into
Yeah.
an interesting point of Winston constantly thinking that they themselves are people that think the same way, in a sense.
Yeah.
And then, as Winston is being tortured within the Ministry of Love, O'Brien, for one reason or another, is actually able to, he knows that Winston thought that at one point or another and agrees that they are men that think the same way. Which I find interesting because this also adds to the idea of thought crime and the party always reading the people's thoughts and judging them for it.
For sure.
O'Brien was the one who ratted Winston out, right?
Yeah.
But in the beginning, he was one of the people who kind of probably pushed Winston to keep going with his rebellion, even in the most subtle way. Eye contact is the most subtle way to even encourage that, but it really helped.
It's really interesting because
Eye contact.
Because and it's O'Brien is clearly egging Winston on, but it's kind of interesting because you don't really know how he's aware that it's kind of interesting to see how does he know and how is O'Brien aware of who's the rebellions. You kind of have to be you have to think twice about that. You have to be how would O'Brien know to make eye contact with Winston, and how would O'Brien know to do all these subtle hits towards Winston specifically, because I'm sure it's more than just Winston that are thinking these things, but Winston's the only one that acts on them, and it's kind of just interesting how O'Brien kind of sensed that and sensed his
it's scary.
Thoughts against the
And then this also relates to Winston's dream of just a voice in the dark saying that we will meet in the place where there is no darkness. Obviously being recognized by Winston as O'Brien's voice. And then as lights are being poured in Winston's face as he is strapped against his own will and being interrogated and tortured for the sake of the party, O'Brien even recognizes that we have met in the place where there is no darkness.
That's crazy. Man, I'm freaking out.
Yeah, it's definitely super interesting. The characterization in 1984 is just all crazy because everyone is so related and so connected, and George Orwell just does a really great job at showing those subtle connections and
speaking of one of those connections of how they're all connected, I feel like would be when we get an instance of Winston's wife who he is separated from, Catherine, they later on go to speak about how everyone who actually follows Big Brother is mindless. They don't pay attention to anyone and all that. And we get that through Catherine. Like, she's the description of not thinking anything at all against, like, Winston describes her as not thinking. I don't know why.
Wait, hold on.
He describes her as basically just everything the party wants in the people that they have in their society, which is how it's like connects back to Winston and his connection to everyone, with the way he connects to Julia, the way he connects to O'Brien, the way he's connected to his wife, and the way he's connected to other people.
Yeah.
And one character in particular that Jenna likes.
What?
The character, the
Sim?
one. Yes, Sim.
We don't know how to pronounce his name. It's Syme, so we're just gonna call him Sim. I guess I liked his character too because he's very short-lived in the novel. He was only introduced in the beginning, and then at that time Winston had admitted that he believed Sim would be vaporized inevitably. Not because he was actively rebelling against the party in any way. It was actually the opposite. He was just enthusiastic about his work, working with Newspeak, and he liked the concept of destroying language and everything. But even he was just intelligent. Sim was a smart person, and that alone was
That led him to his downfall.
Yeah,
That was the one thing Winston pointed out, was he pointed out that Sim was going to be vaporized just because he knew too much. It wasn't even that he was going against anything the party said. It was just that he was just... The party doesn't want people to know about anything they're doing, even their workers.
Yeah.
And
so that's why...
Sim was just too into it.
We don't
for
really,
them to like him.
we don't really get to see a lot of him because of that. But it kind of it's really interesting to see that characterization that, and it kind of highlights the government in that characterization. So if you are smart, or if you are overly smart or overly educated or overly enthusiastic and all that other stuff, with that you can't survive in this society. And it's really interesting to look at the characterization of people like Sim and other minor characters that go away or are very short-lived because of they have that difference.
One of the things that is pointed out is also the neighbors that Winston has. He talks about, when he's talking about Sim being too smart to be staying around, that his neighbor, the father of the family, won't, because he's too much like what the party wants. But then later in the book we see that in the Ministry of Love that his neighbor is there because the kids are so indoctrinated to start hating, to start working for the government, that they're so eager and hyper I can't think of the word, but it's hyper vigilant. That's the word.
Yeah.
On trying to find people against the party, that he says that his daughter, the neighbor's daughter, heard him speaking in his sleep and ratted him out, and he's actually proud of her for doing that, because even though he doesn't know that he's rebelling, he's it's good that she did that before I would start actively doing so. But the kids are so hyper vigilant and so ready to work for the government because they're indoctrinated in that way to just start doing whatever they can to help Big Brother in the party and to rat out their own family members.
And it's also an interesting note to bring this up, of the children being completely indoctrinated in the culture of Big Brother, because it is shown by Winston that this era of Big Brother is just on the verge of the transition between the quote-unquote normal society and the society under Big Brother, where Winston actually remembers what it was like before Big Brother.
Yeah.
And this society is changing.
Yeah.
Where all the older folk are either
senile,
completely enthusiastic over the party, or just brainwashed by the party.
Yeah.
And then there's the children who grow up loving the party and know that the party is the only thing to love.
Yeah.
One of the things that even with that, the children being indoctrinated, is that even Julia, when Winston asked her about knowing before what was before Big Brother, she says she had no recollection, and like there being a war with East Asia instead of Eurasia at the time, she says she vaguely remembered, even though it was 4 years past, because she's so young and she was already starting to get taught that Big Brother is what you do. Big Brother is the regulation. Everything Big Brother says is true, that even though she lived through the changing of the countries they were at war at, even she didn't remember, compared to Winston, because he had lived before Big Brother, he knew. And it just plays into how everything is connected in one way or another, and each of the characterizations are.
Yeah, so it's definitely interesting how George Orwell is able to connect all these characters and able to have just definitely highlight the major characters and how certain, depending on your age, depending on who you were before Big Brother, how that correlates to your life and correlates to what you do and how you feel and what you remember and all that. So we're about to wrap it up. So does everyone have last comments?
Closing statements.
Closing statements.
Questions, comments, concerns, death threats,
monetary
gifts.
I'm broke.
All right.
You got any questions, Shanna? You said you were starting.
No, we're a little short on time.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Sounds good.
Bye.
All right. Hope you enjoyed. Bye.
Bye.